What would you do if your family kicked you out of your own home and sold your belongings for pennies because they found a will that made them wealthy? Would you fight back immediately? Call the police? Or would you do what I did? Let them celebrate their inheritance while you prepared to show them what they'd actually inherited? Absolutely nothing. My name is Betty White, and at 60 years old, I thought I understood human nature well enough to predict how people would behave when they believed money was involved. I'd worked as an estate planning paralegal for 25 years, helping families navigate the complex emotions and legal requirements that come with inheritance planning. I'd seen greed turn siblings against each other, watched adult children abandon elderly parents they thought were broke, and witnessed the ugly transformation that occurs when people believe they're entitled to money that isn't theirs yet. But I'd never imagined that my own son and daughter-in-law would reveal themselves to be the kind of predators I'd spent decades helping other families protect themselves from. The document that started everything was something I'd written 3 years earlier, during a particularly difficult period after my husband Harold's death. I'd been consumed with grief, overwhelmed by financial decisions, and desperate to ensure that my affairs were in order in case something happened to me. So I'd sat down one evening with a legal pad and drafted what I thought my will might look like. It was rough, emotional, and completely unofficial, more of a therapy exercise than a legal document. I'd left everything to my son Marcus, the house Harold and I had built together, the savings account we'd contributed to for 30 years, the small investment portfolio that represented our retirement security. At the time, it had seemed natural. Marcus was my only child, and despite some concerns about his financial responsibility, he was still my family. But I'd never filed that draft will with an attorney. I'd never had it witnessed, notarized, or legally executed. It was just a piece of paper covered with my handwriting and my grief-fueled thoughts about mortality. After writing it, I'd stuck it in my desk drawer and forgotten about it while I focused on actually getting my estate properly planned with a real attorney. The real will, the legal, properly executed document that represented my actual wishes, was very different. But Marcus and his wife Vanessa had no idea that the paper they'd discovered wasn't worth more than the cost of the ink I'd used to write it. I should have destroyed that draft years ago. Instead, it became an inadvertent test of character that Marcus and Vanessa failed so spectacularly that it changed my opinion of them forever. The test began on a Tuesday morning in October when I returned from a routine doctor's appointment to find garage sale signs planted in my front yard. Not just any garage sale signs, professional ones, with bright colors and bold lettering that read Senior Citizen Moving Sale, Everything Must Go. I sat in my car for several minutes, staring at those signs, trying to process what I was seeing. I hadn't authorized any garage sale. I wasn't moving anywhere. And I certainly hadn't given anyone permission to advertise a senior citizen sale using my property. But as I looked past the signs toward my house, I could see the truth of what was happening. My front porch was covered with tables loaded with my belongings, my mother's china, Harold's collection of military medals, photo albums documenting 50 years of marriage, furniture that had been in our family for generations, all of it arranged for sale like the leftovers from someone else's life. Vanessa was standing behind one of the tables, wearing a bright smile and making change from a cash box, while strangers rifled through my personal belongings. Marcus was carrying more items from the house, setting them out with price tags that seemed calculated to get rid of everything as quickly and cheaply as possible. I watched a woman I didn't recognize hold up my wedding dress, the dress I'd worn when I married Harold in 1965, the dress I'd carefully preserved in tissue paper for 40 years, and I heard Vanessa say, $5, it's vintage, probably worth more, but we just need to clear everything out. $5. For the dress I'd worn on the happiest day of my life. That's when I understood that this wasn't just a garage sale. This was an estate liquidation. Marcus and Vanessa were selling my belongings, as if I were already dead, clearing out my house, as if they already owned it, which meant they'd found the draft will. I got out of my car and walked toward my own front porch, like a visitor to someone else's property. Vanessa looked up as I approached, and instead of guilt or embarrassment, her expression showed annoyance at my presence. "Oh, Betty, you're back early," she said. as if my return to my own home was an inconvenience. We wanted to get this finished before you got back from your appointment. Get what finished? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Marcus appeared from the house carrying a box of books, Harold's collection of military history volumes that he'd read and reread throughout our marriage. Mom, we need to talk, he said, setting the box down on one of the tables. Why don't we go inside? Inside my house, the transformation was even more shocking than what I'd seen on the porch. Rooms that had been filled with the accumulated treasures of a 40-year marriage were now nearly empty. Walls that had displayed family photos for decades were bare. Closets were open and cleaned out. It looked like the aftermath of a burglary, except the thieves had been organized enough to price everything before carrying it away. Sit down, Mom, Marcus said, gesturing toward my kitchen table, one of the few pieces of furniture that hadn't been moved to the porch yet. Vanessa joined us, carrying a manila folder that I recognized immediately. It was the folder where I kept important documents, insurance policies, medical records, and apparently rough drafts of wills that I should have thrown away years ago. We found this, Vanessa said, pulling out the handwritten document I'd created during those dark months after Harold's death. Your will. We had no idea you'd already made decisions about the estate. She spread the pages across the table, and I could see that they'd been read thoroughly. There were pencil marks in the margins, highlighting and notes that suggested they'd studied every word carefully. Mom, why didn't you tell us about this? Marcus asked, and I could hear something in his voice that I'd never heard before, a coldness that made me understand he was no longer speaking to me as his mother, but as someone who stood between him and what he now believed was his property. Because it's not finished, I said carefully. That's just a draft. A draft? Vanessa's voice was sharp. Betty, this is handwritten, signed, and dated. It's a legal will. It wasn't. I knew it wasn't, because I'd spent 25 years working in estate planning, and I understood exactly what made a will legally valid. But Marcus and Vanessa's reaction to finding that document told me everything I needed to know about who they really were and what they'd been thinking about my mortality. Even if it were legal, I said, I'm still alive. Nothing in that document has an effect until I die. Marcus and Vanessa exchanged a look that made my blood run cold. It was the look of people who had already begun dividing up my assets and making plans for my absence. Of course, Mom, Marcus said quickly, but we thought it would be good to start organizing things, getting rid of clutter, making the house more manageable for you. More manageable by selling everything I owned to strangers for pocket change. And we thought, Vanessa added, that it might be time for you to consider whether this big house is really the best place for you at your age. At my age, I was 60 years old, in perfect health, and completely capable of managing my own home. But Marcus and Vanessa were looking at me like I was a confused elderly person who needed their guidance and protection. Where did you think I should live? I asked. There are some wonderful senior communities, Vanessa said with false enthusiasm. Places where you wouldn't have worry about maintenance, where there are people your own age, where you could be more social. Senior communities. They wanted to warehouse me in assisted living so they could take over my house immediately instead of waiting for me to die naturally. And in the meantime, Marcus added, we could handle the house, maybe rent it out to cover the expenses, keep everything maintained until I died and they could inherit it officially. They had found what they thought was my will, decided that my continued presence in my own home was an inconvenience, and begun the process of liquidating my life so they could access their inheritance while I was still breathing. I see, I said, standing up from the table. And you started this process without discussing it with me because we didn't want to worry you unnecessarily, Vanessa said. We know how stressful these kinds of decisions can be for people your age. People my age, as if 60 was ancient, as if being older than them made me incapable of understanding what they were doing to me. Well, I said, walking toward the kitchen window where I could see strangers continuing to paw through my belongings. I appreciate you taking such good care of my interests. I spent the rest of that day watching Marcus and Vanessa sell off 40 years of my life, piece by piece, dollar by dollar. I watched a teenage boy buy Harold's Purple Heart for $3. I watched a woman haggle Vanessa down to 50 cents for a photo album containing pictures of Marcus's childhood. I watched my son and his wife transform our family's history into pocket change while congratulating themselves on their efficiency. But I also spent that day planning, because Marcus and Vanessa had just shown me exactly who they were when they thought I was powerless to stop them. They'd revealed themselves to be the kind of people who would steal from a living person, who would manipulate and warehouse an elderly family member for financial gain, who would liquidate a lifetime of memories for convenience and greed. They thought they'd found my will. They thought they knew what they were inheriting. They thought they understood their future financial security. They were wrong about all of it. And tomorrow, they were going to learn exactly how wrong they were. But tonight, I was going to let them celebrate their windfall, while I prepared to show them what they'd actually inherited. Nothing but the consequences of their own greed and cruelty. The next morning, I woke up in what had been my home for 22 years, but now felt like a hotel room that someone else had redecorated. Most of my furniture was gone, sold yesterday for whatever Marcus and Vanessa could get from bargain hunters who didn't know they were buying stolen goods. My bedroom walls were bare, except for the faint outlines where family photos had hung for decades before being priced to move at yesterday's estate sale. But instead of confronting them about what they'd done, I decided to play along with their game. If Marcus and Vanessa wanted to treat me like a confused elderly person who needed their guidance, I would give them exactly what they expected while I prepared my real response. "Good morning," I said when I found them in the kitchen, counting the money they'd made from selling my life yesterday. "How did the sale go?" Vanessa looked up from the cash they were organizing into neat stacks. "Oh, very well, Betty. We made almost $3,000, and we got rid of so much clutter. You must feel relieved to have all that excess weight off your shoulders." Excess weight. My mother's china was excess weight. Harold's military medals were clutter. 40 years of marriage memories were burdens I should be grateful to have removed from my life. "That's wonderful," I said, pouring myself coffee from the same pot that had sat in the same spite for 15 years, one of the few things they hadn't sold yet. "I do feel lighter." Marcus smiled at me with what he probably thought was kindness. "See, Mom? We knew this would be good for you. Sometimes it takes other people to help us see what we really need." "You're absolutely right," I agreed. "Sometimes we don't realize how much we need help until someone else shows us." Over the next few days, I continued the performance. When Vanessa suggested I might want to visit the Pine Grove Senior Living Community just to see what's available, I agreed enthusiastically. When Marcus recommended that I transfer my banking to an account where he could help me manage things more efficiently, I told him it sounded very practical. Most importantly, when they showed me brochures for assisted living facilities and talked about how much happier I'd be around people my own age, I nodded along like someone who was grateful for their guidance. "The thing is, Betty," Vanessa explained as we sat in my nearly empty living room, "you're at an age where living alone can be dangerous. What if you fell and couldn't get help? What if you forgot to turn off the stove? What if someone took advantage of you financially?" The irony of that last comment was breathtaking. She was worried about someone taking advantage of me financially while sitting in the house she was planning to inherit, surrounded by the empty spaces where my sold belongings used to be. "You're right to be concerned," I said. "I have been feeling a bit scattered lately. Sometimes I forget things that I used to remember easily." This was completely untrue. My memory was as sharp as it had ever been, which is why I could recall in perfect detail every moment of the previous day's betrayal. But Marcus and Vanessa both leaned forward with interest when I mentioned memory problems. "Really?" Marcus asked. "What kind of things have you been forgetting?" "Oh, small things," I said vaguely. "Where I put important papers, what I was doing when I came into a room. Sometimes I wonder if I'm making good decisions about money." I watched their expressions change as they processed what I was telling them. If I was having memory and decision-making problems, it would justify everything they'd already done and everything they were planning to do. It would make them my protectors instead of my exploiters, caring family members instead of thieves. Mom, why didn't you tell us you were having these concerns? Marcus asked, his voice full of false concern. I was embarrassed, I said. I didn't want to admit that I might be getting old. Vanessa reached over and patted my hand with mock sympathy. Betty, there's no shame in aging. The important thing is recognizing when you need help and accepting it from people who love you. People who love me. People who had sold my wedding dress for $5 and my husband's Purple Heart for $3. People who were planning to warehouse me in assisted living so they could take over my house. I'm so grateful to have family who care about me, I said, and I could see them both relax as they realized I was accepting their narrative about my helplessness and their helpfulness. That afternoon, Marcus suggested we visit his attorney just to make sure all your legal documents are in order. What kind of documents? I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. Well, your will, for starters. The one we found is handwritten, and it might be better to have something more official. And maybe we should discuss power of attorney arrangements, so someone can help you if you're having trouble making decisions. Power of attorney. The legal document that would give them complete control over my finances, my property, and my medical decisions. The document that would make me their legal dependent and them my legal guardians, even though I was perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. That sounds very responsible, I said. When should we go? How about tomorrow? Marcus suggested. The sooner we get everything organized, the better. Perfect, I agreed. I want to make sure everything is handled properly. That evening, after Marcus and Vanessa had gone to bed in what used to be my guest room but was now apparently their permanent bedroom, I sat in my empty living room and made some phone calls of my own. The first call was to Patricia Morrison, the estate planning attorney who had helped me create my actual will 3 years earlier. Patricia was one of the most respected estate lawyers in the city, with 30 years of experience helping families protect their assets from exactly the kind of exploitation that Marcus and Vanessa were attempting. Betty, Patricia said after I'd explained the situation, what you're describing is textbook elder fantril abuse. The garage sale, the pressure to move to assisted living, the suggestion that you need power of attorney, these are all classic tactics used by family members who want to gain control of an elderly person's assets. But I'm not elderly, I protested. I'm 60 years old and perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. To them, you're elderly enough to be manipulated, Patricia replied, and the fact that they found that old draft will has convinced them that they're entitled to your property. They're not waiting for you to die naturally. They're trying to arrange your legal death through power of attorney so they can inherit while you're still alive. What should I do? Well, you could confront them directly, but given how far they've already gone, I suspect they'll just claim they were trying to help and find more subtle ways to continue the exploitation. Patricia paused, and I could hear her thinking through the options. Or, she continued, we could give them exactly what they think they want and let them discover the reality of their inheritance in a way that teaches them a permanent lesson about the consequences of elder abuse. What do you mean? I mean, we let them take you to their attorney. Let them pressure you into signing whatever power of attorney documents they've prepared. Let them think they've successfully gained control of your assets. And then we show them what they've actually gained control of. Which is nothing, Patricia said with satisfaction. Because your real will, the legal, properly executed will that actually controls your estate, leaves everything to the Elder Care Legal Defense Foundation, with specific provisions that exclude anyone who has attempted to exploit you financially. I smiled for the first time since I'd returned from my doctor's appointment, to find my life being sold on my own front porch. You mean I can let them think they've won, and then show them they've actually lost everything? Exactly. And in the process, we document their exploitation attempts so thoroughly that they can never try this with anyone else again. What about the power of attorney they want me to sign? Oh, that's the beautiful part, Patricia said. Power of attorney over nothing is still nothing. They can have complete legal control over assets that don't exist. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of anticipation I hadn't felt in days. Marcus and Vanessa thought they were taking me to their attorney to formalize their control over my life. Instead, they were walking into the most expensive legal lesson of their lives. Are you ready to get your affairs in order, Mom? Marcus asked over breakfast. I've never been more ready, I replied, and I meant every word. The law office of Henderson Cross and Associates occupied the third floor of a downtown building that screamed expensive legal services. As we rode the elevator up, I could see Marcus and Vanessa trying to look appropriately solemn about the serious legal business we were conducting, but I caught them exchanging excited glances when they thought I wasn't looking. Richard Henderson turned out to be exactly the kind of attorney I'd expected Marcus to choose. Young, ambitious, and more interested in billable hours than ethical considerations. His office was decorated with the kind of expensive furniture and meaningless awards that were designed to impress clients into paying premium fees for routine legal work. Mrs. White, Henderson said as we settled into leather chairs that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Your son has explained that you're concerned about getting your estate planning documents in order. That's very wise at your stage of life. My stage of life. I was 60 years old, not 90, but Henderson was looking at me with the same patronizing expression I'd seen on Marcus and Vanessa's faces, the look of someone who assumed that my age made me incapable of understanding complex decisions. Yes, I said, playing the role of the confused elder that everyone expected me to be. I've been having some trouble keeping track of things lately, and I want to make sure everything is organized properly. Of course, Henderson said with false sympathy. Memory issues are very common as we age. The important thing is recognizing when we need help and making arrangements to protect our interests. He pulled out a folder thick with legal documents. Now, your son has explained the situation. You have a handwritten will that leaves your estate to him, but you're concerned about making sure you have proper support for financial decision-making while you're still with us. While you're still with us. As if I were terminally ill instead of perfectly healthy. That's right, I said. I want to make sure Marcus can help me when I need it. Excellent. What I've prepared is a comprehensive power of attorney document that will allow your son to manage your financial affairs, make medical decisions if you're incapacitated, and generally ensure that your interests are protected. Henderson spread the documents across his desk, and I could see that Marcus and Vanessa were both trying to read over my shoulder as he explained each section. This gives Marcus authority over all your bank accounts, investments, real estate transactions, insurance policies, and medical decisions. Essentially, he becomes your legal guardian with complete authority to act on your behalf. Complete authority over assets that didn't exist, over property that wouldn't be mine to give, over an inheritance that was already promised to someone else entirely. That sounds very thorough, I said. And this will help protect me from making bad decisions? Absolutely, Henderson assured me. People with memory and decision-making issues often benefit from having family members who can step in when needed. I looked at Marcus and Vanessa, who were both nodding earnestly like concerned family members who were reluctantly accepting the burden of caring for their increasingly incompetent matriarch. I'm so grateful to have family who care about me this much, I said, reaching for the pen Henderson was offering. Wait, Vanessa interrupted, and for a moment, I thought she might have developed a conscience. Betty, are you sure this is what you want? This is a big decision. But then I saw the look she gave Marcus, and I understood. She wasn't concerned about my welfare. She was worried that I might change my mind and deprive them of the control they'd been working so hard to achieve. I'm sure, I said firmly. I trust Marcus completely to make decisions that are in my best interest. I signed the power of attorney documents with a flourish, watching Henderson notarize each page while Marcus and Vanessa tried to contain their excitement about their newfound legal authority over what they believed was a substantial inheritance. Congratulations, Henderson said as he organized the completed paperwork. You've made very responsible decisions about protecting your future. There is one more thing, I said as we prepared to leave. I'd like to update my will. The handwritten version Marcus found is old, and I've been thinking about some changes. Marcus looked alarmed. Mom, what kind of changes? Oh, nothing major, I said reassuringly. I just want to make sure the language is clearer, maybe add some specific bequests for sentimental items. That's very thoughtful, Henderson said. Would you like to schedule another appointment to discuss the details? Actually, I've already been working with an estate planning attorney on those updates. Patricia Morrison. Do you know her? Henderson's expression changed subtly. Patricia Morrison was one of the most respected estate attorneys in the city, someone whose legal expertise was legendary, and whose client list included some of the wealthiest families in the state. Of course I know Patricia Morrison, Henderson said carefully. She's very thorough in her work. Yes, she is. We've been working together for several years to make sure my estate planning is exactly right. She should have the updated will ready for execution very soon. I could see Marcus and Vanessa processing this information. They'd assumed that the handwritten draft they'd found was my only will, that their inheritance was secured by that informal document. The possibility that I'd been working with a high-powered attorney on more sophisticated estate planning clearly hadn't occurred to them. Mom, Marcus said as we left Henderson's office, why didn't you mention that you were working with another attorney? I wasn't sure it was important, I said vaguely. She's been helping me think through some complicated decisions. What kind of complicated decisions? Vanessa asked, her voice tight with barely concealed anxiety. Oh, you know, tax implications, charitable giving, making sure everything is distributed fairly. Charitable giving. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud, and I could see Marcus and Vanessa both struggling to figure out what that might mean for their inheritance. That evening, we celebrated their legal victory over my autonomy with dinner at an expensive restaurant. Expensive by their standards, since they were paying with money they'd made from selling my belongings. Marcus raised his wine glass in a toast. To family, he said, and to making sure we all take care of each other. To family, I agreed, clinking my glass against his while thinking about the legal documents that would soon show them exactly what kind of family care they'd actually earned. The next morning, Patricia Morrison called with the news I'd been waiting for. Daddy, everything is ready. The updated will has been properly executed, witnessed, and filed. Your estate planning is complete, and your assets are fully protected from anyone who might try to exploit you. And the power of attorney documents I signed yesterday? Completely meaningless, Patricia said with satisfaction. They now have legal authority over assets that don't belong to you, and an inheritance that doesn't exist. When they try to access your accounts or claim your property, they're going to discover that their legal guardianship is worth exactly nothing. When do you think that will happen? Soon. People who steal from elderly family members usually move quickly once they think they have legal control. I'd guess they'll try to access your assets within the next few days. Patricia was right. It took Marcus exactly 3 days to visit my bank and attempt to use his power of attorney to transfer my savings into an account he controlled. The phone call from the bank manager came that afternoon. Mrs. White, we've had an unusual situation today. A man claiming to be your son came in with power of attorney documents, trying to access your account. But when we checked our records, we found that account was closed last month, and the funds were transferred according to instructions from your estate planning attorney. That's correct, I said calmly. Did you explain that to my son? We tried to, but he became quite agitated. He insisted that he had legal authority over your finances and demanded to know where the money had gone. And what did you tell him? We told him that the account closure was handled by Patricia Morrison's office, and that he would need to contact them directly for any information. I could only imagine Marcus's shock at discovering that the money he thought he controlled had disappeared, but his real education was just beginning. That evening, Marcus and Vanessa confronted me with accusations that I'd hidden assets from them. Mom, what did you do with your bank account? Marcus demanded. The bank says it's closed, and the money transferred somewhere else. Patricia Morrison helped me reorganize my finances, I said truthfully. She thought it would be more efficient. More efficient for what? Vanessa asked, her voice shrill with panic. For estate planning purposes, I replied. She's very thorough about making sure everything is properly arranged. I could see them both struggling to understand what had happened to their inheritance, but they hadn't seen anything yet. Tomorrow, Patricia Morrison would provide them with copies of my real will, the legal document that would show them exactly what they'd inherited through their exploitation and betrayal. and the answer was going to destroy them. The meeting at Patricia Morrison's office was scheduled for 10 a.m. on a Friday morning. I arrived early, wanting to be settled and composed when Marcus and Vanessa walked into what they thought would be a routine estate planning discussion, but was actually their judgment day. Patricia's office reflected 30 years of successful legal practice, floor-to-ceiling law books, elegant mahogany furniture, and diplomas from prestigious law schools that immediately communicated her expertise and authority. This wasn't the kind of lawyer who cut corners or overlooked important details. Marcus and Vanessa arrived exactly on time, both dressed formally as if they were attending a serious business meeting, which, in a way, they were. The business of learning what they'd actually gained through months of exploitation and manipulation. "Please, have a seat," Patricia said, gesturing toward chairs arranged around her conference table. "I understand there are some questions about Mrs. White's estate planning." "That's right," Marcus said, settling into his chair with the confidence of someone who believed he held power of attorney over substantial assets. "We're trying to understand Mom's current financial arrangements." Patricia opened a thick file folder and removed several sets of documents. "Well, let's start with the basics. Mrs. White, you've been my client for how long now?" 3 years, I replied, "since just after Harold died. And during that time, we've done comprehensive estate planning, including a will, trust arrangements, and asset protection strategies." Marcus and Vanessa both straightened in their chairs. Trust arrangements and asset protection strategies sounded expensive and complicated, exactly the kind of thing that suggested a larger inheritance than they'd imagined. "What kind of trust arrangements?" Vanessa asked, barely containing her excitement. Patricia pulled out the first set of documents. "Well, Mrs. White has established what's called an irrevocable charitable trust. All of her assets, the house, savings accounts, investment portfolio, life insurance proceeds, have been transferred into this trust. A charitable trust." Marcus's voice was carefully controlled, but I could see the beginning of panic in his eyes. "Yes, it's an excellent strategy for estate planning when the client's primary concern is protecting assets from exploitation while ensuring they're used for beneficial purposes." Patricia spread the trust documents across the table, and I watched Marcus and Vanessa scan the pages with growing horror. "According to these documents," Patricia continued, "Mrs. White's entire estate will be distributed to the Elder Care Legal Defense Foundation upon her death. The foundation provides free legal services to elderly people who are victims of financial abuse by family members." The silence in the room was deafening. Marcus and Vanessa were staring at the documents like they contained a death sentence, which, in a way, they did. The death sentence of their inheritance expectations. "But what about the will we found?" Marcus asked desperately. "The handwritten will that left everything to me." Patricia pulled out another document, the draft will that had started this entire disaster. "You mean this document? The one dated 3 years ago?" "Yes, that's the one." "This isn't a will," Patricia said calmly. "This is a rough draft, a preliminary exercise that Mrs. White wrote while she was processing her grief and thinking about estate planning options. It was never witnessed, never notarized, and never legally executed. She set the draft aside like the worthless piece of paper it was. In fact," Patricia continued, "Mrs. White specifically instructed me to ensure that this draft couldn't be mistaken for a legal document. That's why her actual will contains explicit language excluding anyone who attempts to claim an inheritance based on preliminary drafts or informal documents." Vanessa was gripping the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles had turned white. "You mean we get nothing?" "That's correct," Patricia confirmed. "The trust documents include what's called a no contest clause. Anyone who challenges the will or attempts to claim assets through other means automatically forfeits any potential inheritance." "But that's not fair," Marcus protested. "I'm her only son. I should inherit something." Patricia looked at him with the cold professionalism of an attorney who'd spent decades dealing with greedy relatives. "Mr. White, your mother's will does include a provision for you." Marcus perked up hopefully. "What kind of provision?" Patricia pulled out the final document. "My actual will, properly executed and legally binding." You are bequeathed the sum of $1, along with a letter explaining that this token inheritance reflects the value your mother places on your treatment of her during her lifetime. $1. After months of exploitation, theft, and manipulation, Marcus was inheriting exactly $1. There's more, Patricia continued. Miss White has also provided a detailed affidavit documenting your attempts to exploit her financially, including the unauthorized garage sale, the pressure to move to assisted living, and the power of attorney arrangements you used to try to gain control of assets that no longer existed. She pulled out photographs that I'd taken of the garage sale, copies of the power of attorney documents Marcus had pressured me to sign, and documentation of every conversation where they'd treated me like an incompetent person who needed their guidance. This affidavit will be provided to the Eldercare Legal Defense Foundation as an example of the kind of family financial abuse they work to prevent. Your names and actions will be part of their educational materials. Marcus was staring at the documents like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Mom, you can't be serious about this. I'm completely serious, I replied. For months, you and Vanessa treated me like I was already dead, selling my belongings, planning to warehouse me in assisted living, and trying to steal my house through legal manipulation. You showed me exactly how much you valued our family relationship, about $3,000, which is what you made from liquidating 40 years of my marriage memories. But we were trying to help you, Vanessa protested. You seemed confused, like you needed guidance. I seemed confused because I was testing you, I said coldly. I wanted to see what kind of people you really were when you thought I was vulnerable. You failed that test spectacularly. Patricia gathered the documents back into her folder. The power of attorney you obtained is now void, since the assets it was supposed to control have been legally transferred to the trust. Miss White retains complete control over her living arrangements and medical decisions, so your authority in those areas is also terminated. What are we supposed to do now? Marcus asked, his voice hollow with shock. That's not my concern, I replied. You're adults who chose to exploit an elderly family member instead of building your own lives. Figure it out on your own. Where are we supposed to live? Vanessa demanded. You can't just throw us out. Actually, I can. The house you've been living in belongs to the trust now. You have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. Marcus looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, the look of someone who just realized that their victim was smarter, more prepared, and more ruthless than they'd ever imagined. Mom, this is insane. We're family. Families don't treat each other like this. You're right, I said, standing up to leave. Families don't sell each other's belongings without permission. Families don't try to manipulate each other into assisted living for financial gain. Families don't forge relationships with attorneys to steal power of attorney over assets that don't belong to them. I walked toward the door, then turned back for one final look at the two people who'd taught me that DNA doesn't guarantee loyalty. What you are now are strangers who made the mistake of trying to exploit someone who spent 25 years helping other families protect themselves from people exactly like you. As I left Patricia's office, I could hear Vanessa crying and Marcus demanding to know if there was any way to contest the will. Patricia's response followed me into the hallway. Miss White, contesting this will would only trigger the no contest clause and result in your complete forfeiture of any inheritance rights. I'd suggest you accept a $1 bequest and focus on rebuilding your life through honest means. 30 days later, I stood in my empty house, watching Marcus and Vanessa load their belongings into a U-Haul truck. The irony wasn't lost on me that they were taking more out of my house than they'd brought when they moved in 6 months earlier, because some of the items they were packing were things they'd bought with money from selling my belongings. Betty, Vanessa said as she carried a box toward the truck. I hope you realize that what you're doing is going to destroy this family forever. The family was destroyed when you sold my wedding dress for $5, I replied. I'm making sure you understand the consequences of that choice. Marcus appeared from the house carrying his computer, probably loaded with research about assisted living facilities and legal strategies for exploiting elderly relatives. Mom, I want you to know that I think this is the cruelest thing you could have done to your own son. Crueler than trying to steal my house? I asked. Crueler than planning to me declared incompetent? Crueler than selling my husband's military medals to strangers? He couldn't meet my eyes. Even now, faced with the complete failure of his exploitation scheme, Marcus couldn't acknowledge what he'd actually done to me. In his mind, he was the victim of my unreasonable response to his reasonable attempts to help. After they drove away, I walked through my empty house and began planning its transformation. The rooms that had been cleared out by their garage sale would be refilled, but not with the same furniture and belongings they'd sold. This was an opportunity to create something new, something that reflected who I was now rather than who I'd been when I was trying to maintain relationships with people who saw me as a source of income. The first thing I did was change all the locks. Not just the door locks, but the garage door codes, the security system passwords, and anything else that might give Marcus and Vanessa access to property they'd tried to steal. The second thing I did was redecorate completely. I painted walls in colors that made me happy rather than colors that matched Harold's preferences or accommodated Marcus's tastes. I bought furniture that was comfortable and beautiful rather than practical and durable. I filled the house with art, books, and music that reflected my interests rather than compromising with other people's opinion. Most importantly, I turned the master bedroom, the room where Marcus and Vanessa had slept while planning my financial exploitation, into an office for my new work as an elder rights advocate. Within 3 months, I was consulting with other elderly people who suspected family members of financial exploitation, helping them document abuse and protect their assets before it was too late. Patricia Morrison referred clients to me, and word spread through the legal community about the 60-year-old woman who'd outwitted her own family's inheritance scam. "Betty," Patricia said during one of our regular check-ins, "you've become something of a legend in estate planning circles. There are attorneys all over the state who are using your case as an example of how elderly people can protect themselves from family financial abuse. I'm glad something positive came from it," I said. "But I have to admit, I wish I'd never had to learn these lessons." "Do you regret how you handled the situation? Some people might say you were too harsh." I thought about that question carefully. Marcus and Vanessa had shown me who they really were when they thought I was powerless to stop them. They'd revealed themselves to be the kind of people who would steal from a living person, who would manipulate and warehouse an elderly family member for financial gain, who would liquidate a lifetime of memories for convenience and greed. "I don't regret protecting myself," I said finally. "I regret that protection was necessary. But once I understood what they were willing to do to me, I had to respond accordingly." 6 months after the confrontation at Patricia's office, I received a letter from Marcus. It was postmarked from Arizona, where he and Vanessa had apparently moved to start fresh after their inheritance scheme collapsed. "Mom," the letter began, "I've been thinking a lot about what happened, and I wanted you to know that I understand now why you did what you did. Not that I like it, but I understand it. Vanessa and I have been struggling since we left. Turns out that planning to inherit someone else's money doesn't teach you skills for earning your own. We've both had to take jobs we don't like, and we're living in a place that's not very nice, and we're constantly stressed about money. But the weird thing is, we're also more honest with each other than we've ever been. When you don't have the option of stealing from family members, you have to figure out how to build a life based on what you can actually do rather than what you think you deserve. I'm not asking for forgiveness, and I'm not asking for money. I just wanted you to know that your lesson worked. We learned that exploitation has consequences, and that family relationships can't survive that kind of betrayal. I hope you're happy in the house we tried to take from you. I hope the trust fund helps a lot of elderly people protect themselves from family members like us. And I hope that someday, if I ever become the kind of person who deserves a relationship with you, you might be willing to try again. Marcus." I read the letter twice, then filed it away without responding. Maybe Marcus was sincere about learning from his mistakes. Maybe he would eventually become the kind of person who could rebuild our relationship based on honesty and respect, rather than exploitation and manipulation. But that was a decision for the future, based on actions rather than words, on consistent behavior rather than single letters. 2 years after Marcus and Vanessa's departure, I was sitting in what had once been their bedroom. now transformed into an office where I consulted with elderly clients who were facing similar family exploitation. The walls were lined with thank you letters from people I'd helped protect their assets, legal documents from cases where we'd successfully prosecuted elder financial abuse, and photos from speaking engagements where I'd taught other seniors how to recognize and prevent family theft. My client that morning was Margaret Chen, a 73-year-old widow whose daughter had been pressuring her to sign power of attorney documents and move to assisted living so the daughter could rent out Margaret's house. "Mrs. White," Margaret said, "I keep thinking that maybe my daughter is right. Maybe I am too old to live alone and manage my own affairs. Maybe I should be grateful that she's willing to take care of these complicated decisions for me." "Margaret," I replied, recognizing the voice of someone who'd been systematically gaslighted by people she trusted. "Let me ask you something. Before your daughter started offering to help with your finances, were you having trouble managing them?" "Well, no. I've always been very careful about money. I balanced my own checkbook for 50 years. And before she started suggesting assisted living, were you having trouble taking care of yourself?" "Not really. I mean, I'm slower than I used to be, but I still drive, cook, clean, manage my medications. So why do you think you suddenly need someone else to make decisions for you?" Margaret was quiet for a moment, and I could see her connecting the dots between her lifelong competence and her daughter's sudden claims that she needed financial management. "You think my daughter is lying about my capabilities to justify taking control of my assets," she said finally. "I think your daughter is using the same techniques that my son used," I replied, "making you doubt yourself, creating dependency, manufacturing crises that require her intervention." I walked Margaret through the same evidence-gathering process I'd developed from my own experience, documenting financial irregularities, maintaining independence, and building legal protections against exploitation attempts. "The most important thing to remember," I told her, "is that genuine help doesn't require you to give up control over your own life. People who really want to help you will encourage your independence, not undermine it." 3 months later, Margaret called with an update that was both predictable and heartbreaking. The evidence she'd gathered proved that her daughter had been planning to liquidate Margaret's assets to pay for the daughter's own financial problems, using assisted living as a way to remove Margaret from the equation. "I confronted her with the evidence," Margaret told me, "and she said exactly what you predicted she'd say. That she was trying to help me, that I was too confused to understand what was best for me, that I was being influenced by outside people who didn't really care about me." "How did you respond?" I told her that people who really cared about me wouldn't lie to me about my own capabilities or try to steal my house while pretending to help me. And I told her that if she needed money, she should get a job instead of trying to steal from her mother. "How do you feel about the decision to protect yourself?" "Sad but not sorry," Margaret said, echoing the exact words I'd used to describe my own situation. "She needs to face the consequences of what she was planning to do, and I need to protect myself from further exploitation." Margaret's case was one of dozens similar situations I consulted on over the next few years. Each family had the same dynamics: adult children who saw their elderly parents as assets to be liquidated rather than people to be respected, exploitation disguised as helpfulness, and legal manipulation designed to transfer control over elderly people's lives to relatives who benefited from their dependence. But the most satisfying part of my advocacy work wasn't just preventing individual cases of elder abuse. It was watching elderly people rediscover their own power and dignity after being made to feel helpless by their own families. The key, I would tell audiences at senior centers and legal conferences, is understanding that age discrimination within families often comes from people who benefit financially from our perceived helplessness. They want us to believe that our age makes us incapable of managing our own affairs, because our dependence makes their exploitation seem justified. I developed what I called the Family Financial Independence Protocol, a comprehensive guide that elderly people could use to protect themselves from inheritance-motivated abuse. Never sign legal documents under pressure, even if they're presented by family members who claim urgency. Maintain relationships with people outside your family who can provide objective perspectives on family financial discussions. Keep your estate planning confidential until you choose to share it. And don't let family members pressure you into premature disclosure. Document any attempts by family members to control your finances, isolate you socially, or question your mental competence. Remember that people who exploit elderly family members often use love and guilt as weapons against their victims. Most importantly, I would conclude these presentations. Remember that your experience and wisdom are advantages, not liabilities. The person who's lived longest has usually learned the most about recognizing deception, manipulation, and false promises. 5 years after Marcus and Vanessa's eviction, I received an unexpected visitor. It was Marcus himself, standing nervously on my front porch, with a small bouquet of flowers and an expression I'd never seen before. Genuine humility mixed with deep shame. "Mom, I know you probably don't want to see me, but I was hoping we could talk, just for a few minutes." I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda. What I saw was someone who looked older, sadder, and possibly wiser than the man who'd tried to sell my wedding dress for $5. "What do you want to talk about?" I asked through the screen door. "I want to apologize. Really apologize. Not the fake apology I tried to give when you first discovered what Vanessa and I were doing. I want to tell you that I understand now what we did to you, and why you had to respond the way you did." "I'm listening." "We didn't just try to steal your money. We tried to steal your dignity, your independence, your right to control your own life. We treated you like you were already dead, like your only value was as a source of inheritance. We made you doubt your own judgment and capabilities because it served our financial interests." This was more insight than Marcus had ever shown about the psychological impact of his crimes. "What changed?" I asked. "Consequences," Marcus said simply. "When you cut us off, when we lost the inheritance we've been counting on, when we had to face the reality that we destroyed our relationship with you for money that was never ours to begin with, we had to figure out how to build lives based on what we could actually do rather than what we thought we deserved." He paused, looking down at the flowers he was holding. "It took me 5 years to understand that what we did was attempted murder. Not physical murder, but the murder of your autonomy, your dignity, your right to live your own life on your own terms. We were trying to turn you into a dependent, confused old woman who existed for our benefit instead of her own." "And now?" I asked. "Now I understand that the cruelest thing we did wasn't trying to steal your money. It was trying to convince you that you were too old, too confused, and too helpless to stop us." I opened the screen door and stepped out onto the porch. Marcus looked genuinely surprised that I was willing to be in the same space with him. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness," he said quickly. "I don't deserve it. I'm here to tell you that your response to our exploitation probably saved other families from going through what we put you through." "What do you mean?" "I've been following your advocacy work. The speeches, the consulting, the legal cases where you've helped other elderly people protect themselves. You turned our betrayal into something that helps other families avoid the same trauma." Marcus handed me the flowers. Not expensive ones, just simple daisies from a grocery store. "I wanted you to know that I'm proud of who you became after we tried to destroy you. You turn our worst behavior into your best work." "Thank you," I said, accepting the flowers. "But you should know that I didn't do it for you or to teach you a lesson. I did it to protect myself and help other people avoid similar betrayals." "I know. That's what makes it so impressive." We stood on the porch in awkward silence for a few moments. Two people who had once been mother and son, now strangers connected only by a shared history of betrayal and consequence. "Do you think we'll ever have a real relationship again?" Marcus asked. I looked at my son, older, humbler, and possibly wiser than the man who'd tried to steal my house, and realized that this conversation was a kind of relationship different from what I'd expected to have with my adult child, but honest in a way our previous relationship had never been. "I don't know," I said truthfully. "Trust has to be earned through consistent actions over time, not through single conversations or apologies." Marcus nodded. understanding that this was both more and less than he might have hoped for. "I love you, Mom, and I'm sorry it took losing you to understand how much damage I was willing to do to someone I claimed to love." "I love you too," I replied. "But love and trust are different things, and family relationships can't survive that kind of betrayal without consequences." After Marcus left, I sat in my garden with the daisies he'd brought, thinking about the unexpected journey that had led from his attempted theft to my current work as an elder rights advocate. His betrayal had been devastating, but it had also revealed strengths I didn't know I had, and led to work that was more meaningful than anything I'd done before. I'd learned that the worst thing that happens to you can sometimes become the foundation for the best thing you ever accomplish. At 65 years old, living alone in the house I'd fought to keep, surrounded by the life I'd built from the ashes of family betrayal, I was more purposeful and more fulfilled than I'd ever been. The draft will that had started everything was now framed on my office wall, not as a legal document, but as a reminder that trust is precious, that family bonds can be weapons when wielded by the wrong people, and that protecting yourself from exploitation isn't selfishness, it's survival. This story isn't just about one woman's fight against family financial abuse. It's about recognizing that age doesn't make us vulnerable to deception. It gives us the experience to recognize it, the wisdom to document it, and the strength to fight back against it. If someone in your family starts treating you like you're already dead, questioning your mental competence, or pressuring you to sign legal documents that transfer control over your life to them, remember this story. Remember that criminals often use family bonds as weapons against their victims, and that protecting yourself from theft isn't a betrayal of family loyalty. It's a necessary act of self-preservation. And remember that the most dangerous mistake any criminal can make is underestimating a victim who understands that experience is power, that documentation is defense, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family members is show them that there are consequences for trying to destroy your life for their financial benefit. Thank you for listening to my story. This is Betty White, reminding you that your independence belongs to you, your assets belong to you, and your life belongs to you, regardless of what your family members might think they're entitled to inherit. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories, because wisdom doesn't come with age. It comes with surviving people who underestimate your ability to fight back.